Welcome to the Mythic Observatory. Almost every fantasy world begins the same way, not with a hero or a prophecy. Instead, it begins with a catastrophe, a war that shattered the world, a divine betrayal, a magical disaster, a broken artifact, a fallen empire. Yes, before your story even begins, something has gone horribly, dreadfully, terribly wrong. And after that event, often buried in the past, things quietly shape everything that follows. Today, we are talking about the ancient fracture. It is one of the most powerful structural tools in your fantasy storytelling arsenal. And once you start noticing it, you'll realize that nearly every major fantasy world is built on one. I'll be going into it here. And also, please be sure to like, share, comment so others can find this material as well. So, what is the ancient fracture? It's the original destabilizing event in a fantasy world. And it doesn't have to necessarily just be a fantasy world. You see it in sci fi too and other stories. But it's the moment that the world falls out of balance. It's the thing that breaks. It breaks the natural order, the relationship between the gods and the mortals, the structure of magic, the unity of kingdoms, or even the physical world itself. The fracture often happens centuries before the story even begins, but its consequences ripple forward throughout the world's history. In fact, the present world exists in the shadow of that ancient break. So, do fantasy worlds need an ancient fracture? Yes. Yes, it does. A fantasy world without an ancient fracture feels strangely flat. The fracture creates three critical things. First is the instability. If the world is functioning normally, conflict has to be imported, which means a villain has to show up, a war starts, but there's nothing that's attaching itself to it. With a fracture, conflict is built in. We can see the world is failing. It might be because of political systems that are cracking under the hidden stresses, that magic is misfiring or has been corrupted. It may be because forces have leaked through broken boundaries. Villains show up in these broken places. Wars show up in these broken places. Second is mystery. The fracture creates questions about the past. What actually happened? Is the official history true? Did someone create the catastrophe deliberately? Fantasy readers love uncovering lost history, and the fracture gives them something to discover. Third is destiny pressure. Many fantasy stories revolve around the idea that the world must eventually be restored or healed. The ancient fracture becomes the original wound, and the story becomes an attempt to repair it. Now, I would like to add that this idea that the world is broken and must be restored isn't just a fantasy trope. It's rooted in something much older. And what would that be? Mythology. See, fantasy didn't invent these patterns, it inherited them from mythology, which emerged to explain a world that often felt chaotic and uncertain. It provided an explanation, a structure for reality, a sense of control, a reason behind suffering, and maybe most important, a future. Famous examples of ancient fracture include Tolkien's Legendarium, In Middle Earth and the whole world, not just Middle Earth, the ancient fracture begins with Morgoth's rebellion against the divine order. By the time Lord of the Rings starts, Middle Earth has been living in the long shadow of ancient wars and struggle against Morgoth and his lieutenant Sauron. In Star Wars, the fracture is the fall of the Jedi and the rise of the Empire. We start New Hope with Luke Skywalker, with the Republic that has already collapsed. The Guardians of Peace have been basically annihilated, exterminated, and a galaxy is living inside a broken political system. The story here is about restoring balance. In Dune, the fracture is cultural and political. Human civilization has reorganized itself after massive technological upheaval. Artificial intelligence is forbidden. Power is concentrated in noble houses and secret orders. And the world of Dune is not stable. We have a system already primed for transformation. Okay, so what happens if you don't have an ancient fracture? Well, as I alluded, conflict feels added, not inevitable, meaning the villain just poof shows up for no reason. The war starts, but nothing is required to happen. However, an ancient fracture in your story, that has something to move toward. You are more easily able to deepen the story, to give it greater meaning, instead of relying on simple escalation and broadening your story with spectacle, which probably will end up lacking deeper meaning. However, when you add an ancient fracture, you are utilizing mythic storytelling. For one, consider the story behind the Trojan War about Helen and the idea that three goddesses had to be judged of who was the most beautiful. Or even how Zeus came into power because his father Cronus ate all of his siblings. Anyway, fantasy is deeply connected to mythology, which explains why people experience instability, danger, and morally uncertainty. Many ancient cultures understood that their world wasn't perfect. They saw it as an aftermath of something that went wrong. This mindset of theirs naturally produced stories that began with a cosmic rupture, something that went wrong. You can see a world that begins with a war between the gods, a divine rebellion, a broken paradise, a catastrophic flood. This cosmic rupture generates lore because when the world suffers a catastrophe, cultures try remembering and interpreting it. Different groups preserve different fragments of the past. Some record history in books, others preserve it in songs and oral traditions. Some suppress it entirely. The fracture becomes the source of mythology and lost knowledge. You can see conflicting interpretations too. And this is really, really fun to play with your story, conflicting interpretations. But over time, people disagree about what the fracture meant. Was it divine punishment? A political betrayal? A magical accident? These interpretations create factions. These factions help shape the conflict of your story. Ancient catastrophes often leave behind powerful relics, pieces of the world's history, and maybe even the key to repairing the fracture. You may see magical weapons, lost technologies, sacred objects, So, how do you design your own ancient fracture? Well, I'll mention a few here, but I do go into it more over on my companion Substack, and the links are down below. There's another reason why this structure with ancient fracture works so well. It's because it mirrors something deeply human. See, many mythologies describe the world as fallen or broken, but a golden age existed once, and then something went wrong. But there was a golden age. History's been trying to recover from what went wrong ever since. Fantasy stories echo this mythological pattern. The past contains both the cause of the catastrophe and also the clue to healing it. The deeper the characters dig into the history, the closer they get to solving the present conflict. This creates a powerful narrative loop. So, if you're building a fantasy world, the ancient fracture is one of the most useful design tools that you can use. And here's a few questions to explore. First, what broke? Was it a magical system, a divine covenant, a kingdom, an artifact, a boundary between worlds? That's mine in my Heart of the World series. Two, what caused the fracture? Was it done deliberately? Was it an accident? Mine is an accident. A betrayal? Mine's a betrayal as well. A desperate attempt to save the world and it went wrong? And remember, sometimes the villain of the story is really the descendant of the original catastrophe. Not always, but it does happen with frequency. What scars remain? And what I mean from this is, what are some of the visible consequences? What can you see in your story? Do you see ruins? Do you see cursed regions, lost cities, strange magical phenomena? I have some of that in my story. These scars will remind your reader that the world is still living with the aftermath of this ancient fracture. Okay, so what does the world believe about it? And this is so fun. I have different factions believing different things based on snippets of information that they have. It's so fun to play with. But history rarely remembers accurately. Even in our world, it doesn't. Some cultures may believe the fracture was heroic. Maybe some believe that it was catastrophic. These competing interpretations become fuel for conflict in the story. Can you imagine having characters from different cultures and what happens when they rub up against each other? And last, does an ancient fracture matter for a long series? Huh. Well, for epic fantasy series, yes. For example, the ancient fracture becomes the deep structural foundation of the story. If you have a long series with the ancient fracture, oh, that is such deep lore. Early books hint at it. Mid-series revelations expose the truth behind it, and the final books often revolve around healing or resolving the fracture itself. In other words, the catastrophe that began the world's instability becomes the key to restoring it. Not always, but often this is how it works. So, to wrap up, the next time you open a fantasy novel and encounter ancient ruins, forgotten wars, lost artifacts, or mysterious prophecies, look deeper. Chances are you are seeing the echoes of an ancient fracture, a moment long ago when the world broke, and a story that begins because someone finally is going to try and make it right. They're trying to fix it. Anyway, if this sparks something for you, please consider subscribing, liking so others can find this, and visit my Substacks for my companion essay, The Ancient Fracture, the Hidden Engine Behind Fantasy Worlds. And I also have another one designing the Ancient Fracture, which gives a whole lot of worksheets on this. You can find, as I said, the links below. And until next time, may your steel be tempered, your roots unbroken, and your path rise to meet you.